The envelope in my hands bears the unmistakable seal of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Through the hotel window in Stockholm, I can see the early December snow falling in gentle spirals, each flake catching the amber light of the street lamps below. Tomorrow, I will walk across a stage where my name, my actual name, will be announced with crystalline clarity to a room full of the world's most brilliant minds. But tonight, as I trace my finger over the embossed lettering, all I can think about is another stage, another ceremony, where my name should have been called but wasn't. It was supposed to be the culmination of everything. 4 years of sleepless nights, of professors who dismissed my questions, of research that consumed every waking moment and most of my dreams. My doctoral dissertation on quantum field applications in renewable energy had already been accepted for publication in 3 peer-reviewed journals, and whispers in the department suggested I was being considered for the university's most prestigious research fellowship. But as I sat in that uncomfortable folding chair, watching name after name get called, Henderson, Martinez, Chen, Williams, I felt something cold and mechanical settle in my chest when they skipped right over where mine should have been. The ceremony coordinator, a woman I'd worked with for months preparing for this moment, glanced at her list with the kind of practiced indifference that comes from years of administrative routine. She looked directly at me, sitting in the front row in my cap and gown, then looked back down at her paper as if I were invisible. Sarah Chen, she announced instead, calling the name that should have come after mine alphabetically. The mistake became immediately apparent when Sarah Chen remained seated, looking confused. She leaned over to me and whispered, "Alex, I think they skipped you." But by then, the ceremony had moved on with the mechanical indifference of a freight train, and the moment had passed like so many others in my life where my existence seemed somehow negotiable. Let me tell you how I got to that chair, to that moment of stunning institutional negligence that would crystallize everything I'd been too naive to see clearly before. I'd spent my childhood being told I was exceptional. My parents, both struggling to make ends meet in their respective blue-collar jobs, had pinned their dreams on my academic success. They worked double shifts to pay for science camps, tutoring, and eventually my undergraduate education. Every report card, every academic award, every small victory was celebrated with the kind of desperate joy of people who believed education was the only ladder out of their circumstances. "You're going to change the world, Alex," my mother would say, her hands still smelling of the industrial cleaning chemicals from her second job, as she helped me with homework at the kitchen table that doubled as my desk. "You're going to be somebody important." I believed her. More than that, I built my entire identity around the idea that my worth was directly proportional to my academic achievements. When I was accepted to the university with a full scholarship, my parents cried. When I was accepted into the doctoral program with a research assistantship, they told everyone they knew. I was their proof that the American dream wasn't dead, just difficult. But what they didn't see, what I was too loyal to tell them, was how often I felt like an imposter in those ivy-covered halls. My advisor, Dr. Margaret Thornfield, had a way of making me feel simultaneously indispensable and completely disposable. She would pile research tasks on me that went far beyond the typical graduate student workload, praising my dedication while somehow making it clear that my contributions were expected rather than appreciated. "Alex has such a strong work ethic," she would tell colleagues, as if work ethic were a charming personality quirk rather than the driving force behind breakthrough research. Meanwhile, she was first author on papers that were built entirely on my computational models and experimental designs. When I gently suggested that my contributions might warrant co-first authorship, she looked at me with the kind of pitying smile usually reserved for children who've asked for impossible things. "Oh, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with maternal condescension. "You're still learning. These things take time. Focus on your dissertation, and we'll see about publications down the road." The "we'll see" became a recurring theme. We'll see about that conference presentation. We'll see about that research fellowship. We'll see about including your name on the patent application for the revolutionary battery technology that was based entirely on your theoretical framework. And I told myself it was part of paying dues, of learning the academic hierarchy. I watched other graduate students, mostly those whose parents were already professors, whose last names appeared on buildings around campus, navigate these same waters with an ease that seemed almost genetic. They spoke in faculty meetings with confidence, challenged professors' ideas without fear of retribution, and somehow managed to get their names on publications, even when their contributions were minimal. Meanwhile, I worked 80-hour weeks, teaching undergraduate courses that no one else wanted, managing Dr. Thornfield's entire research lab, and watching my revolutionary work get absorbed into the larger machine of academic advancement that seemed designed to grind up people like me and spit out credentials for people like them. The pattern repeated itself in every aspect of university life. During my teaching evaluations, students consistently rated me as one of the most effective instructors in the department. But when teaching awards were announced, my name was somehow always overlooked in favor of professors who taught one course per semester to my four. When research presentations were given at departmental meetings, Dr. Thornfield would present my work while I sat in the audience, watching my innovations described as our research or the team's findings. I learned to swallow the disappointment, to rationalize each incident as an isolated oversight rather than a systematic pattern. I told myself that my turn would come, that hard work and talent would eventually be recognized, that the system was fundamentally fair even if individual moments weren't. The final months leading up to graduation were a whirlwind of completion and anticipation. My dissertation defense had gone perfectly. Even Dr. Thornfield admitted it was one of the strongest defenses she'd ever witnessed. The external examiners praised my work as groundbreaking and paradigm-shifting. One professor from MIT told me privately that my research would likely influence the field for decades to come. I allowed myself to feel proud, to imagine walking across that stage with my parents in the audience, finally receiving the recognition that had been so long in coming. My mother had already taken time off work, something she never did, to attend the ceremony. My father had bought his first suit in 20 years. They talked about the graduation ceremony like it was the Olympics, planning every detail of their visit, researching the best restaurants in town for our celebration dinner. But as that moment in the folding chair crystallized into the most clarifying experience of my adult life, I realized that my name's absence from the ceremony wasn't a mistake at all. It was the logical conclusion of 5 years of systematic erasure, of being treated as a valuable but ultimately replaceable component in someone else's academic machine. The woman with the microphone didn't skip my name by accident. Someone had removed it from the list, and when I investigated later, because of course I investigated, I discovered that there had been a clerical error in my paperwork. Apparently, despite having successfully defended my dissertation, despite having all my requirements officially completed and signed off on, despite being told explicitly that I would graduate, there was suddenly a question about whether I had fulfilled some obscure administrative requirement. Dr. Thornfield explained this to me 2 days after the ceremony with the same maternal condescension she'd perfected over the years. "It's just a technicality, Alex. These things happen. We'll get it sorted out for the next ceremony in 6 months." 6 months. After 5 years of my life, after research that was already being cited by other scholars, after teaching evaluations that consistently ranked me among the best in the department, I was supposed to wait another 6 months because of a clerical error that no one could quite explain. That's when I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like tectonic plates moving after years of pressure. The long-suffering, accommodating, endlessly patient version of myself, the one who had absorbed every slight, rationalized every oversight, and maintained faith in the fundamental fairness of the system, quietly died in that moment. What replaced it was something far more dangerous to people like Dr. Thornfield: absolute clarity. I went home to my tiny studio apartment and did something I had never done before in my entire academic career. I called in sick. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think, without the constant background hum of obligations and expectations that had defined my life for so long. I spent 3 days doing research of a different kind. I printed out every email I had ever sent to Dr. Thornfield. I compiled every document related to my research contributions. I created a detailed timeline of every project I had worked on, every paper I had contributed to, every innovation that had emerged from my work. What I discovered was a pattern so systematic and deliberate that it took my breath away. Not only had my contributions been consistently minimized or attributed to others, but Dr. Thornfield had been actively using my research to build her own reputation, while simultaneously undermining my chances for independent recognition. The clerical error that prevented my graduation wasn't an error at all. It was a deliberate attempt to maintain control over research that was already gaining international attention. You see, while I had been focused on completing my degree and making my parents proud, Dr. Thornfield had been filing patent applications, submitting grant proposals, and building collaborations with industry partners, all based on my work, all with her name prominently featured and mine conspicuously absent. The revelation should have devastated me. Instead, it filled me with a kind of cold, crystalline fury that felt almost like peace. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped trying to make sense of a system that had never been designed to make sense for people like me. Instead, I began to consider what would happen if I simply opted out entirely. I started by copying every file on every computer I had access to in the lab. 5 years of research, code, experimental data, theoretical frameworks, all meticulously documented and legally mine according to university intellectual property policies that I had finally bothered to read carefully. Then, I encrypted everything and transferred it to secure servers. Next, I began reaching out to the international researchers who had been expressing interest in my work. Not through Dr. Thornfield, not through official university channels, but directly. I sent emails introducing myself as the actual creator of the theoretical frameworks they had been interested in, along with detailed documentation proving my claims. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Researchers from Cambridge, MIT, Stanford, and the Max Planck Institute replied within hours, expressing shock that they had been unaware of my direct contributions and eager to establish collaborations. 3 separate research labs offered me positions immediately. 2 technology companies wanted to discuss licensing agreements for my innovations. But the most significant response came from Dr. Elena Vasquez at the International Institute for Advanced Energy Research in Stockholm. She had been following my published work, the few papers where my name actually appeared, and wanted to discuss a position that seemed almost too good to be true. Independent research funding, full creative control, and most importantly, intellectual property rights that would remain with me. Your theoretical work on quantum field applications has implications far beyond what your current institution seems to recognize, she wrote in her initial email. We would be honored to provide you with the resources and recognition that your innovations deserve. I accepted her offer without consulting Dr. Thornfield, without going through university channels, without asking permission from anyone. For the first time in my adult life, I made a decision based purely on what was best for me rather than what was expected of me. The conversation with Dr. Thornfield when I finally told her I was leaving was everything I had expected and nothing I had prepared for. She cycled through disbelief, anger, manipulation, and finally, desperate attempts at negotiation that revealed just how valuable my contributions had actually been. You can't just leave, Alex, she said, her voice cracking slightly around the edges. Think about everything we've built together. Think about your future in academic research. You're throwing away 5 years of work. I'm not throwing away anything, I replied, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. I'm taking my work with me, all of it, as is my legal right. That's when she showed me who she really was. The maternal mask slipped completely, revealing something desperate and grasping underneath. She threatened to block my graduation permanently, to blacklist me from academic positions, to claim that my research had been conducted improperly and couldn't be published elsewhere. You're nothing without this institution, she said, her voice rising. Without my guidance, without this lab, you're just another graduate student with delusions of grandeur. You'll never work in serious research again. I let her finish. I had learned to be patient over the years, and now that patience served me well. When she was done, I opened my laptop and showed her the emails from Cambridge, from MIT, from Stockholm. I showed her the patent applications I had filed independently. I showed her the publication contracts I had signed with journals that were far more prestigious than any she had ever published in. Dr. Thornfield, I said, my voice maintaining that same strange calm, I want you to understand something very clearly. I am no longer asking for your permission, your approval, or your recognition. I am informing you of decisions I have already made. The next month passed in a blur of logistics and legal paperwork. I withdrew from the university officially, forfeiting the diploma that had been delayed by mysterious clerical errors. I discovered that I didn't need their validation as much as I had once believed. The international research community had already begun recognizing my work independently, and that recognition felt more substantial than any piece of paper the university might eventually deign to provide. My parents struggled to understand my decision initially. They had invested so much emotional energy in the idea of my graduation, in the symbol of academic achievement, that they believed would validate their sacrifices. But when I showed them the offer from Stockholm, when I explained the level of recognition and compensation that came with it, they began to see what I had realized, that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away from a system that was never designed to value you properly. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" my mother asked during our last conversation before I left for Sweden. "It's such a big change, and we're so close to seeing you graduate." "Mom," I said, looking at this woman who had worked 2 jobs for years to support my dreams, "I am graduating, just not in the way we originally planned." The work in Stockholm was everything Dr. Vasquez had promised and more. For the first time in my academic career, I was surrounded by people who valued innovation over hierarchy, who cared more about advancing human knowledge than protecting institutional prestige. My research accelerated at a pace that amazed even me, freed from the constant navigation of academic politics and the energy drain of fighting for basic recognition. Within 18 months, I had published breakthrough papers in 3 different fields. My theoretical frameworks were being implemented by technology companies around the world. The battery innovations that Dr. Thornfield had tried to claim credit for were revolutionizing renewable energy storage on an industrial scale. But the real validation came from an entirely unexpected source. I was working late in my lab in Stockholm, lost in calculations that were leading toward what I suspected might be a fundamental breakthrough in clean energy generation, when my assistant knocked on my door with an envelope that would change everything. "Dr. Morgan," she said, using the title that still sounded strange and wonderful to my ears. "This came by special courier. They said it was urgent." The envelope bore the seal of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and for a moment, I assumed it was some kind of administrative communication related to my position at the institute. It wasn't until I opened it and began reading that I realized what I was holding. "Dear Dr. Morgan," the letter began, "the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has the honor to inform you that you have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for your groundbreaking theoretical work in quantum field applications to renewable energy systems." I read the letter 3 times before the words penetrated the protective numbness that had surrounded me for so long. The Nobel Prize, the recognition that represents the absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement. And they had awarded it to me, not to Dr. Thornfield, not to the university that had tried to erase my contributions, but to me personally, for work that I had conducted independently after refusing to accept institutional erasure. The irony was almost artistic in its perfection. That night, I called my parents from Stockholm. My mother cried when I told her about the prize, but they were different tears than the ones she had shed when I walked away from graduation. These were tears of vindication, of justice finally served, of dreams fulfilled in ways that exceeded even her most ambitious imaginings. "I always knew you were special," she said through her tears, "but I never imagined anything like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But that's the thing about walking away from people who don't value you properly. Sometimes you discover that you're capable of far more than they ever allowed you to believe." The next few months leading up to the Nobel ceremony were a whirlwind of media attention, academic conferences, and speaking engagements. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the young researcher who had revolutionized clean energy theory seemingly overnight. Journalists asked about my background, my education, my inspiration for the work that had earned such unprecedented recognition. I answered their questions honestly but without bitterness. I talked about the importance of institutional support for scientific research, about the value of mentorship and collaboration, about the great teachers and colleagues who had influenced my work along the way. I never mentioned Dr. Thornfield by name, never spoke publicly about the systematic erasure I had experienced, never used my platform to settle old scores. But that didn't mean the academic community failed to notice the implications of my story. Within weeks of the Nobel announcement, three separate investigations were launched into research attribution practices at my former university. The patent office began reviewing applications that had been filed by Dr. Thornfield's lab, comparing them against documented evidence of individual researcher contributions. Several major journals issued corrections to previously published papers, adding my name to author lists where it had been omitted. Dr. Thornfield herself reached out through intermediaries, expressing interest in rebuilding our professional relationship and acknowledging past oversights. The messages had the desperate quality of someone who suddenly realized they had discarded something invaluable and wanted it back. I didn't respond to any of them. The Nobel ceremony itself took place on a crisp December evening in Stockholm, in the same concert hall where I had attended performances during my time at the Institute. As I walked onto that stage, hearing my name announced with perfect clarity and pronunciation, I thought about the folding chair at my would-be graduation ceremony, about the woman who had looked right through me as if I didn't exist. The King of Sweden placed the medal around my neck with the kind of ceremonial dignity that transforms a moment into history. The audience, filled with the world's most brilliant minds, with colleagues who valued my work, with parents who had finally gotten to watch their child receive the recognition she had always deserved, rose in thunderous applause. But what I remember most clearly from that moment wasn't the applause or the ceremony, or even the weight of the medal around my neck. It was the absolute certainty that I had made the right choice when I stopped waiting for other people to recognize my worth and began creating the life that matched my actual value. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of creating research environments where innovation can flourish regardless of traditional hierarchies. I spoke about the responsibility we have to ensure that brilliant young researchers receive the recognition and support they need to change the world. I talked about the courage required to walk away from systems that diminish us, even when those systems promise security and belonging. Scientific breakthrough, I said, looking out at an audience that included several people who had tried to erase my contributions, requires not just intellectual curiosity, but institutional courage. We must be willing to question not just natural phenomena, but the human systems that determine whose questions get asked and whose answers get heard. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Nobel laureates, government officials, and international researchers mingled over champagne and traditional Swedish delicacies. I found myself in conversations with people whose work I had admired for years, who were eager to discuss collaborations and future research directions. Near the end of the evening, I stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Stockholm's winter landscape. The city sparkled with lights reflecting off the snow. And for the first time in years, I felt something that had been missing for so long, I had almost forgotten what it felt like: peace. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Watching the ceremony on TV. So proud of you, sweetheart. You really did change the world. I smiled, pulling my coat tighter against the December cold. Change the world. It was the same phrase she had used when I was a child struggling with homework at our kitchen table, when she worked double shifts to pay for my education, when she believed that academic achievement was the key to a better life. She had been right, just not in the way either of us had originally imagined. 3 days later, I received an email from the university's new president. Dr. Thornfield had been quietly asked to step down from her position, offering me an honorary doctorate and an invitation to give a keynote address at their next graduation ceremony. I declined politely but firmly. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Instead, I continued my work in Stockholm, surrounded by colleagues who valued innovation over politics, who believed that the best ideas should rise to the top regardless of who originates them, who understood that true collaboration means sharing both the work and the recognition. My research continued to evolve and expand, leading to breakthroughs in multiple fields and spawning an entire generation of young researchers who approached scientific inquiry with the kind of fearless independence that can only come from seeing someone succeed outside traditional power structures. But perhaps the most satisfying development came 2 years after the Nobel ceremony, when I received an invitation to speak at a conference for graduate students and early career researchers. The theme was navigating academic hierarchies and advocating for yourself in research environments. The auditorium was packed with young scientists who reminded me of my earlier self: brilliant, dedicated, and often struggling to understand why their contributions weren't receiving the recognition they deserved. I looked out at their faces and saw the same mixture of hope and frustration that I had carried for so many years. Let me tell you about the most important lesson I learned during my graduate studies. I began. Your worth as a researcher, as an innovator, as a human being, is not determined by whether other people choose to recognize it. It exists independently of their recognition, and when you truly understand that, you become powerful in ways that no institution can take away from you. I told them about the folding chair, about the ceremony where my name should have been called but wasn't. I talked about the years of systematic erasure, about research attributed to others, about the moment when I realized that I had been trying to earn respect from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. The question isn't whether you're good enough for the system, I said. The question is whether the system is good enough for you. And if it isn't, you have the power to create something better. After my talk, dozens of young researchers approached me with their own stories of overlooked contributions, stolen credit, and systematic marginalization. Many of them were women, people of color, first-generation college students. People who, like me, had been taught that academic achievement was the path to respect, but had discovered that some institutions were more interested in extracting their labor than recognizing their genius. I gave them my contact information, offered to serve as a reference for independent research positions, connected them with colleagues at institutions that valued innovation over hierarchy, but most importantly, I gave them permission to value themselves even when the people around them didn't. Years have passed since that graduation ceremony where my name wasn't called. I've published groundbreaking research, received international recognition, and built a career that exceeded even my most ambitious childhood dreams. But the real victory wasn't the Nobel Prize, or the academic accolades, or even the financial security that finally allowed my parents to retire. The real victory was the moment I stopped waiting for other people to give me permission to be exceptional and started acting from the knowledge that I already was. Dr. Thornfield occasionally appears in the news now, usually in connection with ongoing investigations into research attribution practices or ethics violations in academic settings. I don't follow these stories closely, but colleagues sometimes forward them to me with expressions of vindication or justice served. I understand their impulse to see her downfall as validation of my choices, but the truth is more complex than that. Her attempts to diminish me were never really about me at all. They were about her own insecurities. Her fear that recognizing brilliant work from people she considered beneath her would somehow diminish her own achievements. In the end, she was wrong about everything that mattered. Wrong about whether I needed her approval to succeed. Wrong about whether I could thrive independently. Wrong about whether the research community would recognize quality work regardless of its institutional origins. But mostly, she was wrong about the nature of scientific achievement itself. Real innovation doesn't come from protecting existing hierarchies or gatekeeping access to recognition. It comes from creating environments where brilliant minds can flourish, where good ideas rise to the top regardless of who originates them, where collaboration means sharing both the work and the credit. I've built my career around these principles, and the results speak for themselves. My lab has become a destination for researchers who want to pursue groundbreaking work without navigating traditional academic politics. We've produced innovations that are changing industries, training young scientists who approach their work with fearless independence, and contributing to human knowledge in ways that would have been impossible within the constrained environment I left behind. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret walking away from that graduation ceremony. If I ever wonder what my life would have looked like if I had stayed and fought for recognition within the system, rather than creating my own path outside it. The answer is simple. I regret nothing. Every choice that led me away from that folding chair, away from institutions that treated me as disposable, away from people who confused hierarchy with merit, brought me closer to the life I was meant to live. A life where my name is spoken with respect, where my contributions are valued, where my work makes a difference in the world. And tomorrow, when I wake up in my home overlooking the Stockholm Harbor, I'll continue that work surrounded by people who understand that true recognition isn't something you wait for someone else to give you. It's something you claim for yourself by refusing to accept anything less than the respect you deserve. The girl who sat in that folding chair, waiting for her name to be called, is gone. In her place stands a woman who knows that the most important recognition comes not from institutions or ceremonies or even Nobel committees, but from the quiet certainty that you have honored your own gifts and refused to let anyone diminish them. That woman doesn't need permission to be extraordinary, lest she already is.